worshipper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are, wander, worshipper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. I am Lisa Conger, your worship leader this morning. We're glad to have you with us. UUCS is a very welcoming congregation, and we appreciate your unique background, beliefs, or lifestyle. If you're one of our longtime members or have been here a short time, or if you're joining us today for the very first time, we're delighted to have you. And welcome to everyone here, as well as those who are streaming our service. It is our mission to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship to the wider world. Or in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Before we turn to greet one another, I would like to briefly introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Paul Lindholdt, who's a church member. He will be gifting us, and that is for sure, gifting us with poetry, a subject very dear to my heart as well. Please take a few moments now to greet one another. Don't be shy. Please be sure to say hello to someone you haven't met yet. Thank you. We'll have more time to greet one another and continue our conversations and stories during social hour after the service, where they serve coffee and tea behind that brown divider, in case you're new. Okay. We now turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, the symbol of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world, and a beacon of hope to those who in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. I believe in the power of poetry for healing, growth, inspiration, and the commemoration of what we hold dear. For me, writing poetry is a way to process what I'm thinking and feeling, and it always teaches me something. Here are a couple of definitions of poetry that I'd like to share with you. The first is by John G. Stackhouse. Poetry condenses, compacts, crystallizes experience and insight. The best poetry is translucent, prismatic, kaleidoscopic. It lets light in and then splits it up, plays with it in order to reveal something of the world previously unnoticed or insufficiently celebrated or inadequately mourned. And this from poet Gary Snyder. Poetry is a tool, a net, or a trap to catch the present, a sharp edge, a medicine, or the little awl that unties knots. Our guest speaker, Dr. Lindholdt, has made a life in poetry. It is a love of his as it is of mine. He will be sharing his poetic insights as well as some poetry with us this morning, and I know it's a feast because I was here during the earlier service. Okay.
And we are singing poetry today. You may not have thought of it necessarily, but many of our hymns are poems, and we have lots of famous poems in that hymnal. We started off the morning with Rumi. It's an adapted version of Rumi's words with Come, Come, Whoever You Are. And now we're going to continue with Eleanor Fargen. This is a song I know you know. Morning Has Broken. And most of us are familiar with it, and at least that are old enough to be in the 60s, with Cat Stevens' version of Eleanor's words. And he used all of her words. And this is that same hymn tune that her words have gone with for years. Please rise as you're willing and able to sing Morning Has Broken, 38.
Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our hearts and minds and who we want to wrap in our love and care. We kindle light this morning for all of those living with the tension between Russia and the Ukraine, and for all those who've been touched by COVID. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts this morning. You are welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing. Those named aloud and those remembered in the silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
Okay, I invite all the kids and all the young at heart who want to come up for the story, in this case the poem for all ages, and then we'll sing you out to your classrooms. Yeah, you can just sit right down here. So I am going to read a poem that I used to read to my young son. He was a rough and tumbly little boy, and we enjoyed reading from Falling Up. It's not like falling down, it's falling up. And it's by Shel Silverstein, one of America's great poets. And I'm going to read The Furniture Bash. The hand of the clock pinched at the foot of the bed. So the foot of the bed kicked the seat of the chair. So the seat of the chair sat on the head of the table. So the head of the table bit the leg of the desk. So the leg of the desk bumped the arm of the couch. So the arm of the couch slapped the face of the clock. And they pinched, and they punched, and they banged, and they knocked, and they ripped, and they flipped, and they rolled, and they rocked, and the poor dresser drawer got a couple of socks. There was sawdust and springs when I turned on the light after that horrible furniture fight. And that's the lie. That's the truth. No lie, no joke. That's how your furniture all got broke. Go now in peace, go now in peace. Spirit of love surround everywhere,
Let us shift our attention now to a time of meditation. I invite you to find a relaxed, receptive posture, to close your eyes if you wish, and to take a couple of deep breaths as I begin with this little poem I wrote entitled, A Poem. A poem is a paper enchantment performing a certain magic that can pierce the heart and soul to heal and make whole. Dr. Paul Lindholdt is a professor of English at EWU and the author of multiple books, including his most recent, Making Landfall, which was available at the back but is now sold out, so we'll have to take orders, I think. So he's a recent member of our church, but he's been attending for some time. So please welcome Dr. Lindholdt.
Good morning. You in the pews and you on Zoom, thank you for coming and welcome to the church if you're new. I would like to notify you about the other speakers coming this month. While Todd is on sabbatical, I enlisted a couple of them. One is my colleague of social work, Ed Burns, who is speaking on police accountability with a particular emphasis on racial disproportionality in searches and seizures. He's been researching this for many years, and it should be a good presentation. Another speaker is the Reverend George Taylor, who deliberately got arrested for protesting the trains transporting oil and coal that come through our city, because he's a climate change activist, and he knows, like I do, that those fossil fuels impact heavily upon our environment. And the last speaker this month is Jerry White, who is the Spokane River Keeper, and he will be speaking about the anniversary, I think it's the 40th year anniversary of the Clean Water Act, which of course has implications for the health of the Spokane River. My title today, what is poetry good for? And I will answer it before I even give you any poems. It is good for many things. It is polyvalent. Leave it to an English professor to give a big word. It's polyvalent. It has many values. I'm going to focus on 3 of those values, though. It delights, it instructs, and it heals. It does those things by means of images, and images are those which appeal to one of our 5 senses, and they give word pictures above all. I begin with a poem by an obscure poet, German-born from Pennsylvania. His name is Francis Daniel Pastorius, and this poem is untitled, but you will see immediately how instructive it is. The hours for sleep I thus prefix: to students 5, to merchants 6, to travelers I do grant 7, to sluggards 8, to fools 11. It's didactic. There's another fancy word. That's a didactic poem. One of my buddies, when I gave that poem to him some time ago, said, well, that places me somewhere between a sluggard and a fool, I reckon. We are all hardwired to love poetry from the time we're kids, whether it's Shel Silverstein, which I love, or Mother Goose, who I argue is the greatest poet of all time. Mother Goose, of course, is a fabrication. There was no Mother Goose. Rather, it's a collection of traditional poetry come down to us in the language of English throughout all of the centuries. Now I'm going to begin with some Mother Goose, requesting your forbearance as I do, because the kids are gone, but here goes anyway. You know some of the Simple Simon saga. Poor Simple Simon. We delight at his naivete. First of all, Simple Simon went to see if plums grew on a thistle. He pricked his fingers very much, which made poor Simon whistle. Whew. Naive Simon thought plums grew on a thistle. Another one, Simple Simon met a pieman going to the fair. Said Simple Simon to the pieman, let me taste your wares. The pieman said to Simple Simon, first let's see your penny. The Simple Simon said to the pieman, indeed I have not any. So he thought he could get some pie for free. Sing a song of Sixpence. If I were bolder, I'd be singing it for you. You've all heard it before. I'm just going to recite it for you. Sing a song of Sixpence, pocket full of rye. 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? The king was in his counting house, counting out his money. The queen was in the parlor, eating bread and honey. The maid was in the garden, hanging up her clothes, when along came a blackbird and snipped off her nose. I love that poem because it has great depth, more depth than we realize, and I'm going to take it apart for you quickly here. The pocket full of rye that opens the poem is the maid's. She has been sent to market to buy the rye flour to make the crust for the pie that the royalty has requested. It was before the time of bags and sacks, so she has to carry it in her pocket. Her job is to bake the pie. The blackbird avenges itself and all its clan upon her because it believes that she's the cause of the decimation, when in fact she's just following orders, right? Meanwhile, the gluttonous king and the greedy queen both get off scot-free. At its core, then, this is a poem of social stratification and injustice. I give you now a poem of political justice in Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. I see this poem as an allegory for a political fall from grace. We might think of Governor Huey Long in Louisiana, the crook, or Richard Nixon, another crook. When their administrations crumble, when they fall from grace, there's no reassembling them. They cannot be repaired. So I'm not going to do a lot of analysis. I know we come to poetry chiefly for the delight of it, for the sounds of it too, because poetry is music. And I know Deb agrees with this, and she's already made that point. Some poems blur the audience between adults and kids. They delight both strata. And here's one titled The Reason for the Pelican. It's by John Ciardi, the late John Ciardi. And Ciardi had a special gift. He called it his sonnet machine. He would take topics from his audience and brood for a minute and then immediately spin out a sonnet of perfect 14 lines, iambic, pentameter, and rhymes. I wish I had that gift, but I don't. So here's the reason for the pelican. The reason for the pelican is difficult to see. His beak is clearly larger than there's any need to be. It's not to bail a boat with. He doesn't own a boat. Yet everywhere he takes himself, he has that beak to tote. It's not to keep his wife in. His wife has got one too. It's not a scoop for eating soup. It's not an extra shoe. It isn't quite for anything. And yet you realize it's really quite a splendid beak in quite a splendid size. Ah, yes, the reason for the pelican. A foremost function of poetry historically is to instruct readers in religious faith. And we are in a church, and I am duty-bound to give some of that to you. John Donne, last name D-O-N-N-E, was a contemporary of Shakespeare. He wrote a sonnet series called the Holy Sonnets, and I give you a quatrain, a 4-line sequence from one of those sonnets now that demonstrates how high church clergymen like himself love to replicate the pain of Jesus Christ by inviting pain, inviting the Lord to inflict pain upon them. It is difficult for us rational types to understand that. At least it is for me. Here's that quatrain, that 4-line sequence. Batter my heart, 3-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, overthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. Wow, renewal through violence. It's very hard for many of us today to understand the imitation of Christ that drove a lot of the high church faith back then. One who's milder and more adaptable to our modern tastes is Gerard Manley Hopkins. He was a Jesuit priest who spent time in Wales and who wrote his poems mostly during the 1880s. Some of you will recall from school this one, God's Grandeur. It's a sonnet, and here goes. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not heed his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives a dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last light off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. After religion, following religion, the most popular topic in all languages of poetry is love. We all know love poems. Roses are red, violets are blue. Some of them are quite sappy. But I want to give you one that I hope you won't think is sappy. It's by the Russian-born poet Yevgeny Yevtushenko. Yevtushenko was popular enough as a reader, as a poet, that he could draw in an audience of 10,000 people. This poem of his is titled Waiting, and I love it for reasons I'll explain. My love will come, will fling open her arms and fold thee in them, will understand my fears, observe my changes. In from the pouring dark, without stopping to bang the taxi door, she'll run upstairs, through the decaying porch, burning with love and love's happiness. She'll run, dripping upstairs. She won't knock. She'll take my head in her hands, and when she drops her overcoat on a chair, it will slide to the floor in a blue heap. I love that poem, especially for that final image. The shed garment slipping to the floor so that our eyes don't pry upon the intimacies of the lovers in their clutch, just like the films of the 1950s and 1960s. My favorite poems, the kinds that I teach as a professor as often as I can, are ecological poems. And this one I give you now is by Howard Nemerov, Nemerov, who was the brother of the famous American photographer Diane Arbus. This poem is titled The Distances They Keep, and the word they in the title is birds. It's a poem about birds. They are with us always, but they have the wit to stay away. We're walking through woods, a sudden bush explodes into sparrows. They show no desire to become our friends. So also with the pheasant underfoot in the stubble field, and lazy lapwings rise to give their slow unanimous consent. They want no part of us, who dare not say, considering the feathers in our caps, they are mistaken in the distances they keep. Still, the heart goes out to them, goes out, and maybe it's better this way. Let them stay pieces of world we're not responsible for, who can be killed by cleverness and hate, but being shy enough may yet survive our love. And again, the final line of that poem is what intrigued me enough, what caused the poem to memorize itself in me. Think about it for a second. There are some forms of love that are so powerful that it's all one can do to withstand them, to survive them. Love so powerful, it has to be survived. Another foremost function of poetry is to heal. It is commonly called self-help or self-care poetry. In certain moods, I like to call it religion for the irreligious. I'll give you some of those poems now, which I don't have memorized, so I'm going to be reading them. Rumi from Persia, which is today Iran, wrote, in a clever extended metaphor or analogy, this human being is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Be grateful for whoever comes. Each has been sent as a guide. Another self-help or self-care poet, the Austrian Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote in German, gave us this one. So you must not be frightened if a sadness rises up before you, larger than any you have ever seen. If a restiveness, like cloud shadows, passes over your hands in all you do, something is happening to you. Life has not forgotten you. It holds you in its hand. It will not let you fall. And my favorite among the self-help poets, Mary Oliver. I heard a story about Mary Oliver between the sessions today. She helped heal a member of our congregation who lost her infant daughter. And she read this poem that I'm about to recite. Quite coincidentally, she read it over and over and over again, and this poem did more for her, she claimed, than any therapist whom she saw. Wild geese. It soothes by integrating us readers and listeners with nature. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscape, over the mountains and the rivers, the prairies and the deep trees. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. The final poem I give you is by my very favorite poet of all time, shy of Shakespeare, that is. His name is Wallace Stevens, and this is a fragment from a super long poem titled Notes Toward a Supreme Fiction. Two things of opposite natures seem to depend on one another, as a man depends on a woman day on night, the imagined on the real. This is the origin of change. Winter and spring cold copulars embrace, and forth the particulars of rapture come. Music falls on the silence like a sense, a passion that we feel, not understand. Morning and afternoon are clasped together, and north and south are an intrinsic couple, and sun and rain a plural, like two lovers that walk away as one in the greenest body. In solitude, the trumpets of solitude are not of another solitude resounding. A little string speaks for a crowd of voices. The partaker partakes of that which changes him. The child that touches takes character from the thing, the body it touches. The captain and his men are one, and the sailor and the sea are one. Follow after, O my companion, my fellow, myself, sister and solace, brother and delight. Thank you.
Well, our last sung poem this morning is by William Blake, he of Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, you might remember. I chose this one because our minister emeritus, Bill Hauff, used this poem, part of this poem, for the title of his book, which was Hold Infinity in the Palm of Your Hand. And that's part of the text of this poem. I'm going to have Maura play the melody through so you can hear it, because we haven't sung this one before. It's a melody by Edvard Grieg, and then we will sing this poem twice. Please rise as you're willing and able. To see
I think we just celebrated a feast of sound and images and music, and so thank you for sharing it with us. As we travel into this week, I invite you each to look for poetry, listen for poetry, or create some poetry. May poetic blessings guide you and bring you hope and beauty. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.